there's still a lot of changes on those. I think it's good.
Good. Settling down.
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. We're at 10 o'clock straight up, so let's go ahead and get rolling this morning. Welcome, everyone, to YJOC. You all have gathered by now that I'm a history nerd, and so I have today's history trivia. On June 11th of 1776, the Committee of Five was established to draft the Declaration of Independence. So in the spirit of America 250, as we introduce ourselves and give our roles today, I'd like to hear if you could go back in time and be at any historical event in American history, what would it be? So shall we start? I know we have a history nerd right here. Yeah, Chris, do you want to start, Chris?
This is terrible. Don't start on this side.
I did not. But I actually said, I tried to guess. So E.T. was released today. So I was like, well, we'll see where we're going. I'm going to say.
E.T. was released today?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm going to say the moon landing so that I could actually be the first person on the moon and take all the shine away from the Purdue grad.
I feel like I need a pass. I don't even know. That was a big question, right? So many things you could choose. I don't know. I'm struggling. I'm passing.
I think for me, I don't know why immediately I went to this, but I think it was such a big thing in our society when the helicopters were chasing OJ as he's running down the highway. I don't know why I went there, but it's just kind of like, I'm just with with media and just everything. I don't know.
Like one of the people on the bridges.
Yeah, I don't know. That was a historic event, but I don't know where I would be. Maybe just by the TV watching that again. I don't know. It was so sad.
This is just the first thing that came to mind. Probably Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech.
Yeah. This is going to sound odd, but I feel like something around 9/11, but before it happened, so I could have made it not happen or something. I don't know, like something not there, but I don't know.
Tracy?
I kind of also went to the civil rights. So I mean, that was kind of right before my time. I know my parents lived through it, so I would have liked to have been, I don't know, freedom writer or something. That would have been so amazing to see that struggle and probably that.
Mm-hmm.
Gosh, this is Randy, my husband. He teaches history. I've always been fascinated by the Tea Party. I don't know why, but I think that it would have been amazing to see all the intricacies that led to that decision. So that's the time I'm choosing.
Mm-hmm. This was hard to have the whole other table to think about it. Maybe Chicago World's Fair. I like craft and technology and things like that, and that would have been interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I've been trying to think of something kind of cheerful or inspiring event to be at, and sadly, I'm kind of trying to blank. But I think it would have been, I guess, interesting to be around during like maybe the first Independence Day celebrations, the first few years, just to see how culturally people celebrated that in the early years.
I've totally like a cliche one and say after the drafting of the Constitution and to hear those original arguments, to see compare and contrast arguments being made today and maybe how close or far away are we?
Good one.
I think it should be Pittsburgh.
Another cool one, yeah.
We'll be in Dallas. I want to intervene on Lee Harvey Oswald.
All right.
These are all so good. I think for me, something with Lincoln, just because I want to see what he looked like, hear how he sounded, maybe get his great address.
I would like to be at the Ed Sullivan show when the Beatles first played. I'd like to be older than I was at the time because I was just one, but yeah, it's to enjoy it.
I would love to be present for any speech of MLK or Lincoln, actually maybe in their earlier days as it's forming and coming together. So you could see kind of where the result came in. But on top of that, also at the premiere of QT, so I could build up my tolerance. And when it came to the cinema a year later, there wouldn't be these accusations that I cried in front of my siblings because that didn't happen.
I'm with you, Mark. I also cried at ET and it was traumatic. You did not. I'm sorry. I did.
Come
on. So I'm going for passage of the 19th Amendment, women's suffrage. I think that would have been very cool to see that happen. All right. We're going to start right out with approval of minutes because I'm always bad about remembering to do this. So we have two sets, February 12th and April 9th, sets of minutes to approve if there are no edits.
I have an edit to the April 9th.
Okay.
The piece about says how the percentage of young people who live in JDI counties and counties that we're serving currently, it says 27%, and that should be 74%.
Okay. It's a big difference. Thank you.
The last bullet above the upcoming meeting dates.
Okay. Any other edits? Do we have a motion to approve the February 12th minutes?
So moved.
Okay. Do we have a second?
A second.
Motion and second. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. February 12th minutes are approved. Next, April 9th meeting minutes. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Okay. Second. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of approving April 9th meeting minutes as amended?
Aye.
Opposed, nay. All right, meeting minutes are approved. We'll move right into work group updates. We'll start with Doug and grants today.
Thank you. So I'd like to start, we welcomed Magistrate Bolton to the grants work group as a co-chair, and this week was her first meeting. Last Friday, the Indiana Criminal Justice Institute Board of Trustees approved funding of our funding recommendations provided by the review committee. And then to our subcommittee, the Board of Trustees approved that funding cohort. The subcommittee has also been working on what type of technical assistance we'll provide to those grantees that we have not awarded funds to, have perhaps started an application within our system and have not completed that application. And then also just other communities we know through either JDAI or other initiatives that could possibly be ready to submit an application, have to ensure applications have quality. That's not something that we are planning to do solely at the Institute. That's a partnership among many of the groups that meet with us as part of the work group, including courts and Indiana Youth Institute. We do intend to bring a new funding formula or a new idea of a funding formula or a concept of a funding formula to the August meeting for review. We have been asking for feedback on our proposed timeline, which is currently looking at a release for the next round of funding on or around November 30th, with a due date of sometime in mid-January or so, with the goal of having those applications be approved at the April board meeting of the trustees. So that's what we've been working on. We've got a lot of work to do in July, but Ellen and Elena have been fantastic at pulling off this deal. So I don't know if Nancy has anything to add.
Just the report that was distributed was not the final report. I did send that. I think, Chris, I sent that to you on Tuesday, so maybe that could get distributed to the group. The dollar amounts that are in the draft that you all received are correct. There were a couple just other minor changes before we finalized the report that you all should have received.
Any questions for Doug today?
Do you want to talk about the dashboard also? You can see.
I haven't seen it, so I don't know. We're working on that.
Sounds
Gonna be great.
You're like, no, Nancy, no.
Maybe we'll preview it.
Sounds good. All right, thank you, Doug. Next up, we have data, Dr. Alsma and Chris.
So I'm going to start off and I'll have Chris have clarification. So continuing process with phase 2 in terms of intervention, data quality. So right now that's really focusing on referral data entry practices, training gaps, challenges aligning data entry and requirements. So our team has continued to partner with the juvenile justice strategists and meeting with partners. So we're really excited about that partnership. So there's sustainability around data quality and data entry practices. We've really been focusing on diversion programming, reporting, ongoing diversion data collection efforts, and developing curriculum and training material is kind of where we are right now. So some activities include an audit tool to really look at data quality and what that looks like, standardizing data entry instructions, refresher training and data definitions. So that work is ongoing, and we're going to be meeting again soon in July to kind of continue that process and start to think about how to roll some of these out on a broader basis. Clarifications, Chris?
I don't believe so. I think you nailed it as usual.
Yeah. Anything else from counties that we've been kind of working with in the process? We've done some more focus groups, and I'm looking at Nicole's nodding her head. And any other? Yeah.
No, we had a meeting this afternoon, so I'm not sure what that's going to entail. But next steps, I see.
Maybe a dashboard?
No, I don't anticipate that. Sure.
Yeah, really thinking practically about tools, definition, and kind of next phase.
All right, any questions for Dr. Alsma or Chris? All right, thank you, Dr. Alsma. We're going to add behavioral health work group report. Sarah, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so we had the opportunity to meet in May and really big discussion regarding whether or not we should remain a committee or go underneath the CISC Mental Health and Substance Use Task Force. Just making sure that we are not duplicating efforts, right? And that we are aligned with the work that they're doing. I think ultimately we decided it would be best to maintain this, committee also and really work in collaboration with all of those. I think we're kind of the string that like touches everybody's subgroup and we go through. So really being intentional about how we support the work happening in all the other subcommittees. So I think we all agreed that we would continue. We had 2 subgroups of our committee that have finished up all their work, and those are no longer going to be happening. So we kind of disband the subcommittees of our subgroup. And currently no plans really to create any new subgroups within ours. We did have an update regarding there's a Medicaid project happening with justice involved and youth who are now entitled to some case management, targeted case management while they are incarcerated, so that 30 days prior to discharge, they can get targeted case management, which will help be that warm handoff out into the community to make sure they have the right services in place. And then you get 30 days of targeted case management after re-entry into the community. So Medicaid has been working with DOC as the first kind of group to really, I guess, pilot this, right? Because DOC being one entity, it's easier with policies and rules to kind of work through all of that versus all of our different operating detention centers. So I do know that that's the next group that they're looking to target, but we had an update on that. I think it's going well. I think it's a great opportunity for us to support youth in their reentry so that we can have the right services in place when they enter the community again. So that was a big thing. And then just a reminder that we have the telehealth one pager, which that subcommittee reviewed. We have it over at the CISC for their input. And then once we get the CISC input, we will then bring it back to this group for finalization and approval. I think that's it.
All right. On the Medicaid piece, I think that's going to be interesting and really important to watch. So can I ask your group to continue monitoring how that's rolling out and look for opportunities to partner? I know Grants Work Group is looking at funding streams, so that would be another resource for families to receive services. So trying to put our finger on what resources are already covered by other pay sources so that we can reserve the YJOC grant funds for gaps.
Okay.
Yeah. Questions for Sarah?
I just have a question. And Sarah, you may not know this. Do you know, is the targeted case management available to all who are exiting, or do they have to qualify for Medicaid?
I don't know.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's, I know it's not yours.
Yeah,
so.
it's,
Okay.
no, but I could find out.
Thank you.
Yep. I'll try to do that actually right now.
I think it is all.
All, okay.
Yeah.
There's an
It's just-
assumption.
Yeah, the first time Medicaid can be billed for youth in carceral settings.
Right.
is
Right.
huge.
Right.
So, yeah, this is pretty monstrous.
And I think all states were required to implement it, right? CMS is requiring it of all states.
Other questions for Sarah? All right. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah.
Next up, we'll move into the Commission on Improving the Status of Children update. That will be Mark.
So lucky you, there's not as much legislative update as usual since we're kind of in that safe zone of being in June where there's not a ton, but we do have some upcoming items that I just want to make sure is on everybody's radar. And yes, we're still watching implementation of Senate Bill 171 and a little bit with 1257, the information sharing one, and the child fatality review language in there as well. So those probably will be looking at a task force that we want to assign some ongoing monitoring and any fixes that we want to propose out of that. So that's still very much on the radar. I think right now it's kind of in that test phase of let's see how implementation is going, get some of those reports back from the judicial officers, from DCS and others, and see if there's room to make some shifts there to make it do as it was intended. So that will continue to be a large thing. Last year, there were a couple of items that came through session. So just note legislation related to juvenile expungement. That's still going to be a background project between the legislature, and Mindy Pickett with Court Services has got a group coming together on that as well on our end. So if you're interested in the juvenile expungement cleanup piece where there's a lot to do, there'll probably be people reaching out to you if they haven't already, or I can help you make that connection, get involved there more. Also, Gail Casa was assigned to an interim study committee, notably the one on fiscal policy, so which makes some budgetary recommendations. So the idea of making sure that those programs are properly funded. Also, I think some of the intention is as we're building some more oversight over the GAL, that we have proper funding to do that and do that well, and not lose some of our partners and volunteers that go into those programs. So that'll be one that interim committee will probably, you'll see them meeting sometime September, October, most likely, but we'll keep you updated on anything that happens in that discussion, any recommendations that come in on that. That'll be one where they probably do meet once and the report's mostly written. And it will be a tiny fraction of the time that we'd love to have for that discussion, but there'll be a lot of background work. So just know we are attached to that. We're watching that closely. We're going to be pretty involved on how that goes next. We also had language on the Kids First Trust Fund that will be moving its board under the Children's Commission. That will be next year. So June, July crossover time there, that'll move over. We're not expecting massive changes, but it will be a place where we can think about funding opportunities specific to child abuse and neglect prevention. That could be recommendations that come out of this group in the CISC and our other subgroups, to give them some ideas of where to put some of the funding proposals out that come from that. It is not the same amount of funding we have for the YGOC grant funds at all, but it is a good pocket to be good for some community outreach, education programming, prevention initiatives going into schools, things like that. So just something to tuck away as that continues to grow a little bit more. We touched briefly last meeting, I think, on safe baby courts, and we're kind of making some shifts on getting those off the ground. So that was passed legislatively a couple of years ago. We're kind of just moving some things around internally at the courts. But the good news is, as we're doing that, we're shifting it from being strictly a certified problem-solving court model to more of an overlay of best practices and approaches that go into the court. We're doing that so that could be something that actually gets layered on existing problem-solving courts or family recovery courts, but also can be a standalone or be regionalized, more flexibility there. A lot more to come, but we can say in shifting it over and doing it in a more pilot mode, we've had several counties pretty interested in getting involved. So we'll be updating you as we get closer to where we can announce who some of the interested parties are and as that gets piloted out. So we're going to do it slow and carefully and build that model as we go. I'm sure there'll be a lot of room for YGOC to be a part of supporting that where it's appropriate for the scope of the YGOC, but we'll keep you updated, of course. Big items for next year that we might see during session. The CISC, technically our charge ends in code in January of 2029. So I'm going to go ahead and suggest that perhaps they let us continue working because I think we've got plenty of work left to do. As you know, they like to put expirations on all of commissions and committees to make sure that there's pressure to do what you're there to do. So we'll ask for that to get bumped out. Note that the YGOC falls under that same section of code. So unless anybody here is saying like, no, end it now. I think we're okay. Hopefully those are good chuckles. We'll be bumping that out a little bit, look at any funding changes we need to do. It will also be a good time though to think about with YGOC what we have in code, which is largely talking about that report that we generated a couple of years back. Do we want to make some shifts in the language describing what it is and what it does? So I will be doing some early drafting between this meeting and next, and maybe a next meeting we can look at previewing the language related to YGOC about what our ongoing charge looks like and taking out some of the expired language about generating a report 2 years ago. You don't want to ever have where somebody reads that the wrong way and says, oh, so you guys are done. Stop meeting, because we know we're doing a lot of things. And part of why we're going to set priorities later on in the agenda here, so we can map that out a little bit better and have all that in there. And then lastly, we'll probably reintroduce the bill that we had last session in our very, very, very short session on juvenile secure detention visitation policies, and see if we can get that passed and through. Again, that just was too fast moving of a session to get a new topic going much of anywhere. So we'll see if we can pull that back and bring that back around. So that's most of the big updates we have going on post-legislative session. They definitely left a lot of stuff for us to work on and dive into. So if you want to hear more on that or interested in that, we'll have some more talk today on priorities, or always reach out to me. And then lastly, and by no means not the least important thing on the list, but we have our CIS coordinator, Blaine Cook, is leaving us in like a week. So we're going to be missing him greatly. He's been here through the start of a lot of the YGOC work and most of the other big initiatives we've had here. But the good news, we have Ellie Leonard joining us as our new CIS coordinator, or as we will affectionately call her for the next year, new Blaine. Very excited about that. You may have seen Ellie around before. She's helped us out with a lot of lived experience projects and also was a sitting member of the Children's Commission for a 2-year term as well. So not a new face, knows a lot of our policies and procedures really well. The only difference is now she's not technically my boss, I'm technically hers. So super fun. But please welcome her on board. We know we've got a great team of supports from staff all over the courts and elsewhere. So she'll be joining us in all of that. Otherwise, I think that is all I have for today.
Questions for Mark? Well, first I want to say that I heard that Allie just knocked the socks off the interviewers, which is no surprise considering her investment in children's initiatives over the last several years. So very pleased to see Allie in her new role. So welcome, Allie. Catherine, you're welcome to have this one. Outstanding.
Of course. Yep. Yeah.
Also, just a couple of clarifications. The Gal Casa study group, I just want to point out in case you haven't heard that VOCA grants were cut by 40% or so. And that's a primary source of funding for our CASA programs across the state. And so I think the study committee has been sparked by that. There's also been other conversation about, differences in how CASAs operate across counties, as there is when there's any program studied in the state of Indiana. So I think that's one to watch because I speak from Grant County experience. CASAs and guardians ad litem are necessary, and we rely heavily on the work that they do. So I think it's very important that we watch what's going on with our Gal Casa sustainability. And the Kids First fund, the funds for that come from the license plates. So people who opt into the Kids First plate on their car, those extra dollars go into this fund. So it's not a huge amount of money, but there was an independent group operating to oversee that funding. And as part of the efforts to streamline different groups duplicating efforts, that initiative was put under the Children's Commission umbrella. So that's why that change was made.
So I'll be checking license plates.
All right. Next up on the agenda is our JRAC electronic monitoring annual report. Chris?
Sorry, I got a little overly excited, so I wouldn't mess up on the share. So it's been up there for a little longer than it should have. Make this look like a much longer report than what it actually is. I'm doing this sort of as Michelle Goodman's proxy. She is the writer of this report. So to the extent, if you have questions about this, I will do my best to answer them. However, this is really Michelle Goodman's report. But feel free to email me or email Michelle Goodman if you have any questions about the information or the data that's in this. Understand this is largely descriptive. So the requirements of the reporting really just kind of lend themselves to the descriptive nature of this data. It is calendar year 2025, so keep that in mind. Supervision volumes by quarter. So I've broken this up into a couple different, and I apologize, the ribbon on the side is covering up some of this. So you can see the volumes of juvenile electronic monitoring based on predisposition versus post-disposition. The data shows that the use of EM skews heavily, or not heavily, but toward the predispositional. It's present in all quarters except for quarter 4. Offense categories. So there's no really great way of categorizing this. I think this is an acknowledged weakness of this report. That is that the largest group of users or offense categories are the all others. So there's no great definition other than they aren't these other 3 or 4 that are listed. So all other and crimes against a person are the heaviest users predispositionally and post-dispositionally, then property crimes, controlled substance, motor vehicle. Again, this is broken down by predisposition in the, I don't know what that color is called, teal or aqua, versus the more rich blue on the right. Offense levels, again, predisposition, top offenses, misdemeanors, 155 on average per quarter for predispositional use of electronic monitoring. Level 6, 92 on average per quarter, and level 5, 65 average by quarter. Post disposition, 153, pretty consistent across the various quarters. Successful completion was the dominant. I hate the word termination. I would use probably discharge because I think termination sounds very like Arnold Schwarzenegger and now you're done. However, Discharge. So successful discharge is the most likely outcome. Technical violations, new charge, and others. Again, rearing there. I think from working with Dr. Alsma, he loves other categories. So,
Yeah.
all right, juvenile malfunction rates. Like, I don't know the interesting part of this. However, it's recorded. The interesting part is noted in the report is that it sort of is correlating with the amount of time that case managers or individuals that are working on these have to spend clearing up what these malfunctions are. So juvenile malfunction rates, however, are consistently 2 to 3 times higher than that of the adult rate. Juveniles somehow have malfunctioning batteries, damaged units at a much higher rate than adults. What's that?
They live hard.
They do. All right, fees levied and collected. Again, this one's hard to put in without comparing it to the adult world because it feels like a lot. My first glance of this was that's a lot of money that was levied for electronic monitoring fees with juveniles. It's a lot of money that's also collected. What's not necessarily shown, however, is the inconsistencies in just how much of the fees are actually waived by judicial officers. In the adult world, just like in the adult world, there is a consideration that has to be made for ability to pay. But you can see Q2, judges levied a lot more money than the other quarters, and then collected not as much. So there's a big gap there. So any questions about, that's the full report. Any questions about it? I attach the full report. So if you find it interesting, you can dig in a little deeper. You can also do your own comparison against how the adult electronic monitoring is going.
I have one question, Chris, and I'm not sure if you know this, but is this from surveys or how, like self-report or what's this?
It's a quarterly report that is collected as that's required. And Michelle Goodman, again, really amazing at actually getting the counties to submit this. I don't know what her collection rate. I would guess it's around 95% of the counties are actually reporting this data.
Thank you.
But I don't want to hunker off. You don't want to hunker off.
You do not want to. I mean, if there's a takeaway from today, fees levied and don't make Michelle Goodman angry.
Validation, we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Is it something that's tracked, Chris, if you know the carryover from predispositional use to dispositional use?
You know what?
A lot of times if they're doing well here, it's like, oh, look how well they've done some things. Carryover would be easy.
I will not answer definitely. I don't believe so. If not, to me, that if it is being collected, that's the most interesting thing maybe is just how being really good at this status at a predispositional might be the judge is like, well, they're going to continue to be amazing at this post-dispositionally.
We believe that.
I love it. Yeah.
Any other questions for Chris? All right.
I'll try to get my face in on the screen now.
Before we move into setting priorities, I did want to share one thing that I learned yesterday from the director of IARCA, and that is that Lilly has made available about $150 million for the improvement of residential facilities in Indiana. So this is a new thing. I don't know exactly how it's going to roll out. They're sort of looking at parameters and what that might look like. But
Yeah, what does that mean, improvement? Like
Yeah.
facilities or?
Programs.
Yeah.
yes, I don't
Okay,
know.
okay.
Yes, this is, so it's just been announced. It's my understanding that IARCA is sort of working on defining what this might look like because I asked about staff shortages. So could it be something to help turnover, staff shortages, et cetera?
Gotcha.
Or if it's facility related, is it IT related? And at this point, it's a blank slate. So they're structuring what that's going to look like. But I just wanted to announce that that's a big deal. And that's a lot of money to improve facilities across the state. So just sharing. Yes, Nancy.
Do you know if any of it is looking at maybe making smaller group home settings versus larger.
I don't
cottage?
know.
Okay.
Yeah, at this time, I don't know much other than the dollars are on the table.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm. All right, let's move into what you've all been waiting for on the edge of your seats, and that's priority setting. So as you remember from last meeting, homework was to go back to your communities, talk to your folks in your communities from your areas of expertise and figure out what are the biggest priorities, the biggest needs in the area of youth justice, so that this group can look at those and structure next steps as we have completed many of our original charges from the original report. So to structure the discussion today, I just put together a brief outline. So on the front, you have an outline of what the discussion would look like. Nick is going to be our scribe, adding our ideas to the groupings of data work group expertise, grants work group expertise, behavioral health expertise. And this is not to say they're definitely going to those work groups, but do they already fit one of our existing categories? And then there is an other. So Dr. Alsman will be very happy to see we've added an other here to figure out what areas do not fit any of our existing categories, and then do we need to create an ad hoc or standing committee to address some of the additional ideas. So we will go around the table and receive ideas from each of the members. Other members are welcome to ask clarifying questions as people give their ideas. As Nick hears those, he will add those to the slide and he will note any repeat answers. Then once everyone has responded, we'll then start sorting those. So let's start with the responses first. And I will point out on the back of the sheet, you have from Magistrate Foley, who's enjoying some much needed time off with her plants outside today. Instead of being here with you all here today, she provided her ideas for priority areas in advance of the meeting. And then I cut and pasted from last month's minutes, the ideas at the bottom as well. So I will flip this time and start on this side of the room. So Mark, would you like to go?
I think a lot of what I had was probably integrated in the early comments already, but mostly about looking at how we, especially as we look at, well, crafting in code, what the definition of this group's going to be in the future, what engagement is going to look like, and then what specifically legislative engagement is going to look like, and making sure that we have firm priorities around those, which means setting the actual structure for that, but then that we go through and we say, here are our three legislative and engagement priorities for the coming year, and have that really mapped out a little bit more so we can have that focus and make sure that we have a charge to go forward with before we get distracted by all the other fun things that I put on everybody's list.
So is that one?
That can be 1 or 7. Yeah. So, but yeah, I'd say legislative engagement and then engagement with other stakeholders at a more general level, making sure that everything we do is fully engaged with the proper entities. So I put legislative in a separate bucket because that's more of an ongoing task.
Okay, I've written that down as 2. Do you have a third?
And third, I think just the one that we've heard a lot about that we haven't found a way to find our place in yet is looking at that community safety element. So we've talked about gun safety, we've talked about alternative programming for youth in communities that don't have that, but what do we do to have that community safety component really addressed concretely through what we're doing here as prevention, as diversion, as community alternatives, and everything in between.
Any clarifying questions for Mark? All right, Judge Dolahanty.
Well, thank you. And I'm glad I sat next to Mark because a lot of this falls right into the bucket of comments that he made earlier and some of these just now. I think task 1, this is a legislatively created body here. I know the legislature doesn't participate always directly. It'd be nice to see more members here, but they have other duties. I completely understand that. But we exist because of their action. And to me, that means we should have some legitimacy in front of the legislature when we go to them telling them this will work, this might work, this won't work. Please stop doing this. So I think of that as, and maybe I should change that mindset, but I think of that as more legislation defense, right? They make proposals, and then perhaps a subgroup or a couple of subgroups that could be very lithe and reactive might carry this group's multi-jurisdictional feedback to them before those matters, those bills get actually filed, or before they get heard by committee, if that's possible. Might be a bit of a pipe dream. But I think of that more as defensive. And I say maybe I should change that mindset, Judge, because instead of being reactive, maybe we should be more collaborative along the way. That's uno. Two, and this one was an easy one. I was trying to think when you gave us the homework assignment, what can I bring back from my particular group that I represent? Would that be senior judges? Okay. Or people that used to do the job before and don't do it in the same fashion now? Okay. So I did ask a few people, and I said, hey, I'm on the YJOC, and one of the assignments we have is to talk. They said, whoa, is that still around? And I'm like, yeah, well, what are you even doing at this point? And I thought, oh, I think I have one that I can bring back. And that is, are we messaging properly? That we exist, we're here. And what is it that we're doing? Must not be getting messaged as well as possibly I thought anyway. So that seems to be number two is PR. And then third, because I went with legislation defense, I think legislation offense is appropriate too. And perhaps a group or a couple of groups could come up with some things that we could present possibly to the legislature to carry forth. Mark's given some suggestions as well. The grants that we've been trying to administer through the Criminal Justice Institute over the past few years have been very helpful. They didn't take off all that well because people didn't really understand, I think, what to do with them in their community, but they're really being utilized now. And just as Doug said earlier, the board just approved a whole bunch of grants, quite a few millions of dollars of grants going out to our communities for really good looking projects. If one of the things we could carry would be to bring more money to the table to continue those types of grant operations, I think that would be beneficial to us, especially in the preventative end of things, child abuse prevention, but also delinquency prevention. Mark kind of mentioned that as well with acts of violence that maybe we could message better from a preventative standpoint. Nancy's likely to bring it up, but one of the most significant things we've done as in the judicial branch over the past couple of decades is the JDAI. The communities that have them have benefited greatly financially. They've reformatted the way they think about detaining children. If we could somehow bring that message to more communities, if that takes more legislative money to do so, that would be another nice place to ask for some additional money. And then I didn't know about the Lilly grant that you just brought up, or Lilly donation that you just brought up, Judge. Going around and working different courts, one thing I've definitely observed is we have a rough time figuring out where we're going to detain the children that we do detain. A lot of people go to great efforts to not detain kids if they don't have to. Kudos across the state for those efforts. When it's time to really detain a child for that child's safety or the safety of that child's community, finding where they're going to go has become increasingly difficult and increasingly expensive for the counties. Wayne County, I was in this week and last week as well, and we ended up placing a child into secure detention, and we had to send them 2 hours and 15 minutes away from home, which they're already, their life's disrupted, but now the parents can't meet, they fall out of touch with their colleague or with their peers, with their teachers, with their own support system. And you just see that it adds to the problems that child's going to have eventually, instead of helping the child find their way down the proper path. So I'm still on positive legislation here, Judge. the last one on that is to take a look, last bullet point, take a look at some fixed period of years that we have had legislative change. For example, termination of parental rights, huge changes in that area over just the past 2 years. Is there anybody tracking that? Right? Do we need to have some type of a legislative or possibly rule in place that would track, are we accomplishing what the legislature was hoping to accomplish when they made the drastic changes to the termination of parental rights laws? It's become increasingly easier for the state to win those cases, right? And what are we seeing as a result? Has that led to more wins? Not more wins for the state, if you want to count those as hard to describe terminating somebody's parental rights as a win. But is the state prevailing in their cases more often, less often, about the same? And what's happening with the kids? Right? If we're terminating parental rights, I did some this week. What happens with those kids? Are we seeing an increase in adoption, the availability of foster parents that want to adopt? Are we going to overwhelm that part of the system? And so maybe some that, to me, that fits into that positive legislative piece, is to take a look at that and see if we are accomplishing the goals that the legislature set out. That was a lot. That felt more like 7, like Mark said. It could be 3, it could be 17. Poor Nick. Yeah, I only had the guest to look over there once, and he's like,
Right, any questions for Judge Dolahanty? All right, Dr. Alsma.
This last month I've been in Allen, Elkhart, Tippecanoe County, and JDAI, and the number one thing there is gun violence. So interventions, what to do, I mean, that is front and center. I think the second issue around behavioral health, and especially what Magistrate Foley mentioned here, is kind of that justice by geography. Do you have the right services where? An example is MST, multi-systemic treatment, and it's expanding more, but it's not sustainable right now without grant funding. So I think for a great program like this, how can they be sustained due to current Medicaid billing? And won't do it. I think the third thing is still substance use. So increasingly with teens, opioid use has gone down, and we have hot spots like Allen County. Allen County isn't seeing very much right now, but Lake County definitely is. Cannabis is huge, so that's my top 3 things.
Mine are very similar to the doctors. Number one is sustainability. I mean, we've been talking a lot about this grant, and there's different grants. JDAI, for instance, JDAI is what, 3.5 years sunsets, and then money for services ongoing. You kind of know what you're doing. You know what you're getting into. Here, what's it look like? Right now, if I was a trial court thinking about jumping into some of this funding streams, I would be like, you know what, I don't know. How sustainable is that? Do I want to go through all this work and do all these things and then it not be sustainable? So I'll look at it from a little bit of a different perspective, because we're 3 years into it, and now we're starting to think, how long is this going to continue to go? Because it's going so well, quite frankly. It's going really well. But as soon as the money dries up, it's not going to go so well. And then there's been like recent events with the community corrections funding that has, if anyone sitting on the bench probably has had some interaction recently with community corrections funding. Many of us have been at least informed that might be cut again. It was cut last year. It might be cut again. We're looking at potential being down over 30% within 2 years. So that's not good. But even more than that, that starts making people think, well, is that going to happen on the ICJI YJOC grants? I don't know what to do with that. So we've kind of placed ourselves a little bit as a state and as an entity, ourselves being all of us together a little bit. I fear that that's a little bit of a predicament. So that's number one, sustainability. 2, I think, is the prevalence and the potency of the new THCs, whatever it is. I'm not well versed on how the children are getting this into their system. I just know that most of them are. And I know many people are saying, why got it from the store? So it's seemingly everywhere. It's seemingly much more potent than marijuana was years ago. So that's the second big consideration I have. And then third, I did speak with people in my community, and from the educational side, as well as what I see, right now, maybe this is a legislative thing. It's like kids, the unaccredited homeschooling, where people can just take their children and leave, even though they have the public system, even though they may have an adjudication for child neglect on their record or a crime against a child on their record. And as soon as they remove that child from that school setting, no one else is there to really even see it or interact or even have any idea how long this child is being neglected. I mean, I think that's a real miss for us as a state, and an easy win. I mean, who's for child abuse? Because that's kind of that's where we're at. Right? You say, well, if these people have previously abused their children, and or has a crime committed against a child, maybe they shouldn't be homeschooling their children. Is that too much there? I wouldn't think so. I mean, I think everyone could agree with that. So, and that comes from the educational side as well as from my own observations, because we have a truancy program and we, coming from both DCS and probation, we see it all the time. It's like, well, what can you do? This kid's going to be neglected, if not, criminally harmed, but the answer is seemingly maybe nothing, mostly nothing. That's what I've got. So that's my thing.
Questions for Judge King? I did want to point out something. So we've heard cannabis twice in a row here, that I noticed recently that case law is silent on the effects of cannabis on young children. And I think that's really interesting. I'm looking over at Waylon here, that CHIN's and TPR case law simply does not include a discussion of that. And I'm puzzled because appellate courts for decades have been saying, we need evidence of this and we need to know more about this in order to make these decisions. And the case law is just silent. So,
yeah. And I would add to that, as I said on child fatality review, the proportion of cases in which THC is present in the adults and the youth that are involved in some of these sort of cases is staggering. So we know that there's some impediment happening, but we don't have the vacuum to act on it. But I think that is a very important area.
okay. Judge Grant?
I agree. The number one thing from our community has been gun violence, gun offenses, and attached to that are much younger children are committing much more serious offenses, even if it doesn't include a firearm of some sort. And then along the lines of some other discussions here, parental supervision is just lacking, and a lot of it not be because housing is a big issue. There's nothing, where they sleep at night, alone, anything else. Lack of employment, or if employed, then no child care. So you've got these older kids taking care of the younger kids, not going to school, all of this stuff. And the same thing as far as education goes. They get, the parents can remove them from school, and then there's no real good system for education. But our schools are also suspending and expelling these kids right and left for offenses that occur both at school and not at school. And then they're just not running up. There's nothing else. There's no parental supervision because of all those other reasons. Also, the lack of secure detention beds. Alternatives to detention are excellent. And we need all of those things, but there are some kids who are a danger to the community, and they're being filled up with our juvenile arrestees. And it's just, we've had to make really tough decisions in triaging and cross our fingers that we're not going to have, a fatality of some sort as a result of that. But the one thing that hasn't really been mentioned so far is essentially it relates to the IAS tools and expungement. My people are so concerned that when they're doing those tools
at the time of arrest and et cetera, they don't have all the picture. They don't have the picture of what we need, and a lot of this self-reported information. And so, we are struggling with repetitive services because we can't see what we did before. Instead of saying, okay, well, that didn't work, we need maybe something a little bit more intensive. Or we need to target it in a different way because we tried all these things, but we don't know we tried all these things because now we can't see all that information. And we don't know that this is the 12th arrest, and maybe we need to stop putting with mom because mom's a mess because all that maybe is expunged or sealed. And there are reasons why we want that outside of the system, but it's not benefiting the children in the system when we can't see what we've done before and need to know how to alter our approach in some fashion. So, I mean, that has been one kind of tangential thing. So I don't know what you do. I don't know what you do different. It's the best tool we have right now. So,
Any questions for Judge Graham?
Tracy has a question. I can
Yeah.
see her over there.
Well, I guess I did not realize when that passed that when it was sealed from probation. So I don't know why we passed something to blind ourselves to what's going on with children. It makes absolutely no sense to me. I get that we want to seal it from the public for those things down the road and to keep kids from collateral issues, but this is the issue. And so I think that needs legislation just to fix it back and ASAP, because that is insanity to me if we close our eyes to what's happening with kids and then pretending that we have their best interests at heart when we're not. But, sorry, it wasn't really a question. I just did not realize that was who it was sealed off from. I thought the court staff were still seeing it as needed to do their job.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go with my other judge. That's it's expunged. They can't see it. It's gone.
After how many days? I forget what it's not automatic. It's somebody's.
Some are automatic, some are not. I get a lot. Yeah, now most of them.
They have an automatic, but I mean, it doesn't happen like the minute so much time passes, right? So they're still on there for a certain amount of time.
I think it's an expiration of 1 year when the child turns 19.
Right, for the misdemeanors, and then the arrests that don't turn into
And
things.
it's not necessary. So my experience, juveniles asking for expungement, not automatic, right? Where they don't get it, this is a more serious offense. I typically don't get requests for expungement until they're adults. I mean, it's been many years now they're asking for expungement. Well, that's not a problem because they're not going to be back in juvenile court. But it's the ones that we're having, they're 13 and they've been arrested and had these things, and now it's 3 years later, those things have been automatically expunged, and now they're doing NIAS, and now they're like, I didn't know that we already did juvenile justice jeopardy 3 times. We did, because you can't.
There was something in the statute that said you still get to see this, so I'm just.
I think we had to they modified it to some extent to make some things available to law enforcement in certain circumstances. But not just I don't know, maybe.
You're a Quest County, right?
Yes.
Because I'm in SRS County, and I just pulled up a record of a kid's case I know is expunged. And I can see everything in SRS. It just says expunged next to it. I can see case notes. I can see every document I've uploaded. Just has a note that it's expunged. So I think it's
you can.
I can, not everybody can, just probation. Yeah.
But we can see there's a case and it says expunged, but it doesn't tell us. We don't see that.
Yeah, I can see everything. I uploaded it into his system, all the case notes, everything. So that might be a West. I don't know.
I don't think they're supposed to be able to see those things.
I don't know. I'm gonna look at it.
So that's a good question. Yeah, and I think that may be low hanging fruit to get an answer on that. So
Because we send the court orders to court technology to expunge the case, and they're the ones that make the notation that it's expunged. It's not something
Yeah, you
that I
can see
do.
that it's something expunged, but
Yeah.
we can't see any pieces or parts of it once it's expunged. But you're saying that you can still see some things, so that's interesting.
No, it's access.
Thank you.
I wonder if different people have different permissions then. Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Our Quest administrator
Mm-hmm.
who has to expunge, there can probably, see things, but other than that.
Any questions for Judge Cram?
I think you have a volunteer, Mark, for Mindy's committee on the expungement legislation.
I'm ready on it.
Yeah, so we've been having a lot of conversations around violent gun crimes as well. Looking at, and our task has been more looking at what other states have done, where have there been successes, what are the components of that, and then most importantly, what's funding. Which then has led us to another conversation around the funding of the juvenile justice system, how it's so intertwined with the child welfare system, and whose responsibility is that? Because there's multiple state agencies involved, courts, but then there's the local funding piece as well. And is there I think the question has been asked is this the way we should be doing it? Are there better ways to do it? And then also trying to look at how the question of is it adequate? And I think adequate is probably not the correct word, but are we putting enough resources to actually get results? Because we could fund many of these things infinitely and still never fully fund. So the other thing that we have been exploring on across all of our different divisions and subject matters is really when we're funding, are we what resources are we providing to our grantees? What requirements are we putting in our grants for evidence-based or evidence-informed practices? Looking at some subject matters have clearinghouses that have already determined this. Others there's not. And so are we ensuring that we're getting quality out of the programs that we're funding? So that's something that we're looking at across all of our funding streams. And then I do think that this group, and specifically the grants work group, needs to spend the next 3 years somewhat solely focused on funding requests for the 3 funding streams that we currently have.
And I would point out, Doug, that Magistrate Foley noted younger children in particular committing more violent crimes. We've heard that now 3 times on this side of the table. But she also pointed out at juvenile judges conference last week that there was discussion among the judges about who is seeing CHIN's 6 petitions, so child is danger to self or others. And I think one judge raised their hands that yes, they're seeing CHIN's 6 petitions, and everyone else was sort of shocked that anyone is seeing those. So this has been, I think, a topic that's gone back and forth over the years. Waylon, you've been around to see that, I think.
100%, yeah.
Push and pull, but I think the intertwining of the funding streams, DCS and juvenile justice, and these younger crossover, fence kids remains a challenge. So I'll just say that I think judges are continuing to see perhaps a vehicle to better serve 10 and 11-year-old kids in the CHIN system. But again, that's a dialogue that's happened, at least in my experience, for decades now.
Yeah, I'll probably, as I say this, probably my personal opinions will maybe come out a little bit on the CHIN 6, and I just wonder if there's a better way to, like, I feel CHIN 6 is very blaming to a child, right? And like there's a lot of ownership that goes with that, and I think that we add trauma, right, as a system when we put those things on the child. And is there a legislative change that needs to happen so that those kids can be served through these systems, and parents are also part of that process, right? Required to be part of that process versus, there's not a required parental participation with a CHIN 6. So,
Do you think they are?
Yeah, I think some don't do that. I think
Yeah.
you, right, like are a different.
So I've managed several Gen 6 cases, and that's what it gets into. A lot of times the parents will not participate to help to get that parent better. And then we're stuck with the Gen 6 and then hard to get out of that to transition to hold that parent accountable. And it causes more damage than just, yeah.
Like, there's a way
Yeah.
to better serve those kids, because I think you're also seeing not just children younger and younger who are engaged in delinquent activities, right? But suicidal ideation, right? We're seeing younger and younger children who are in need of mental health services. Yeah.
All right.
I just wonder, is VCS, are they avoiding the EK decision that was issued by the chief?
Oh,
at
good
all?
question. Good question.
Because they don't really, in my neck of the woods, I mean, I've not seen it.
I'm not aware. I mean, I don't manage the field at this point. So
I just wondered if he sort of side question about the case. Well, you might want to go read that, you know.
yeah.
That's just my perspective, having,
Mhm.
you know, presented on it and kind of thinking, hey, this is a vehicle that we should be using, with what the opinion said. But I feel, I guess I'm especially concerned about maybe there's continuing to be a reluctance from the Department of Child Services to do that, maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah,
This,
Yeah, and I'm
that's
not.
what I'm concerned with, just, and I don't know that the trophy could be used in Gen 6, I think it could be.
Mhm.
We use them, you know, in a JD, so I can not use it in Gen 6.
Mhm.
It's the same juvenile hall, my knowledge. So.
Yeah,
Just
so-
want to throw that out there, okay, so we don't get kind of misinformed.
Yeah. So for those of you who aren't aware, Chief Justice Rush authored in-rate EK within the last 2 years. I don't know the exact date of it, but essentially saying that if a CHIN's case is pending that's been filed under one of the other subsections, not CHIN 6, so not danger to self or others, and the trial court essentially defines this child as a CHIN 6, the court can make that determination, changing the theory of the case, if you will, based on the evidence. So, you know, and it's a really great opinion. It kind of walks through step by step the process. So if you haven't read that, it's a good read. But I also see on this side, you know, blaming CHIN 6, child gets blamed in either system, delinquency or, you know, CHIN 6. And I can also see parents saying it's the child's fault. It's not my fault. So why are you making me do anything? So it's complicated, to put it mildly. Yeah. All right. Next up, Liz.
Okay, so just kind of as preliminary, the Public Defender Council, we sort of took the lens of we represent our members who are public defenders, and then by extension, their clients. So looking at our priorities, we were kind of taking the theme of first, you know, do no harm. The kids and the families who are pulled into the justice system should not leave any worse off than when that contact occurred. So our priorities, from that perspective, the first thing that we kind of identified is continuing, this is sort of a legislative goal, continuing to advocate for family connection, family communication, going back to the, you know, least restrictive, most family-like along those lines, not just with the legislation, but also kind of with the culture and the communication. That should be sort of an accepted set point. And I think optimistically, a lot of the facilities that were contacted during the work on getting that minimum communication, they reported, hey, we already have these policies in place. Our kids can talk to their family members, supportive people on a regular basis. So I think that's great. But I think that's more than just a legislative change to set a floor, but kind of a cultural discussion. And then the second thing, I think, dovetails a little bit with some of the Gen 6 stuff, as well as some of the things that Magistrate Foley identified with younger and younger kids. But the idea of setting a minimum age for involvement as with a delinquency matter altogether. Setting a minimum age that says a delinquency disposition wouldn't be appropriate for a child under this age, I think is an important consideration when you think of kind of the evidence about does being determined, you are a juvenile delinquent, is that in itself harmful at a certain point when there are other interventions that could be more supportive or helpful. And then along with that, continuing work to keep kids out of the adult system as much as possible. I think that kind of goes together. And then the third priority is kind of working with the juvenile adjudication. Sometimes the process itself is the rehabilitation. And so keeping the process fair, predictable, efficient, all of those things, I think, are incredibly important. And one of the things that I think is kind of on the horizon that I'm excited about is the Supreme Court's Rules Committee is establishing a work group to put together juvenile delinquency court rules. We have trial rules, we have, the PCR, we have kind of bits and pieces of adult systems that are applied in juvenile court, but I think the idea that we can really improve that fairness, that predictability, what you're going into, attorneys can advise their clients, this is what's going to happen, and it will be handled efficiently. And so I think that's a piece of that third priority.
Any questions for Liz? Oh, yes. Please speak in the mic if you are speaking.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For those of you going forward. Thank you, Peyton. Judge Broadwell?
I'm going to mention one that other people have mentioned, gun violence. Specifically, one of my big concerns is children's access to machine gun conversion devices. And I don't know if it's this way in all of the counties, but the number of cases that I have, I'm in a major felony adult court. I'm not in family court or juvenile court anymore. But the number of my kids that are on my caseload that I have, it's because of machine gun conversion devices that they've either just possessed as a level 5 or that they've used. And that's something that's a huge concern. And I wonder if a lot of that could be addressed with some type of education, and some type of information on how they get these devices. You put these devices in a Glock 19 and now you have a machine gun. And then it's that, and then the extended magazine. So it's not just children with guns, it's children with incredibly dangerous guns, really dangerous guns. And I'm just seeing more and more of those instances in my court. So that was one issue. And then the second and third are kind of the same, but in two different pieces. Pre-trial options for kids that have been waived or direct filed into adult court, and then post-trial options for kids that are in adult court. When I was in our family division, the probation department is involved with kids with the delinquency matters kind of from the beginning. But then if you're direct filed as into adult court, rightly or wrongly, you don't really have as many options for those kids that you would in the juvenile system, even for pretrial. So if it's someone where if they were an adult, you'd be okay with releasing them on GPS or home detention, the same type of offense, it's kind of a quandary with kids, because sometimes then you're putting them their home, and who is going to be supervising them at home? You're not putting them in a great place. And so I think that's something that I find somewhat that I'd like us to try to find more options for kids that are in that, because they're still juveniles, but they're in adult court, and just putting you back on home detention with the people that were supposed to be monitoring you before. Whereas if you're an adult, you can say, well, you can't stay here, or here's an exclusion zone. It's hard to do that when you have someone who is under someone else's control and you're trying to make them comply with the court. And then same thing with probation and community corrections. When I see the parties enter into plea agreements with some of the kids, and they give them the same type of sentence that they would give a 21-year-old or a 23-year-old, and it just doesn't work. And so that's something that I think needs to be looked at, or options for these kids that are in this weird place of being waived or direct filed. So.
Questions for Judge Broadwell?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about that quandary of what to do with the juvenile and adult, and that you would have had more options in juvenile, are you meaning you would have put them in a placement?
Not placement necessarily, just a lot of the programming that's involved. Some of the things like Boys and Girls Club and things like that are options that the juvenile probation officers just seem to have more options and a more oversight and involvement with the kids from the beginning of the case while the case is pending. And you just don't get that with the kids that are direct filed as adults.
So you would put them in Boys Club. I'm trying to figure out like
what I'm saying is a lot of these
community places to put them,
or programming that's not necessarily places to put you, but services for you to have access to. So,
but do you have that for adults, like an 18 or 19-year-old? I mean, I would say that's just a gap in adult services, maybe, but.
No, but adults are different, right? Because you're not under someone else's control. And so a lot of these folks, they're people that if they were 19 or 20 or 21, they would be out on home detention. But as juveniles, when they're out, they're with people that are not necessarily great at helping them be the best versions of themselves. So that's the issue. I'm not talking about my 17-year-olds that are charged with murder that are going to be in prison. I'm talking about the people that cannot control their own environment. So,
can I jump in real quick on that topic?
Please do.
I absolutely agree. We see it working with the youthful offenders in Marion County Jail. We can't order case management therapy through DCS because they've been, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Case management or therapy or any of those kind of things because they've been waived. And so we're in this kind of tricky spot where we do rely on grant funded services to go into those spaces to provide, but we do see the same things. We are putting them in that home environment that caused this, you know what I mean, in a sense. And there's a lack of things that we can do with them. It's like we can't utilize DCS to kind of pay for the case management therapy, like I said, or mentoring. And again, not for the ones like the murder or the high level felonies, but there are some that could benefit from some kind of restorative services.
Those are the kids I'm talking about, not people that they're going to be in jail anyway, or they're on their way to prison. So.
Right. Thank you, Kia, for that input. Any other questions for Judge Broadwell?
Thank you.
Those are mostly handgun cases, probably. Is that right?
What?
Talking about handgun cases?
Yeah.
So there's almost a gap in 16, 17-year-old.
Right.
In that position. So when they go back to the same environment, done.
Right. That let them have access to machine guns in their house, and so, and that's yeah.
Well, even when they're 19 years old, that's where they're going too. I mean, they're still children. Yeah. Yeah. True.
You talk about someone that's been waived illegally, but still a child.
Yeah.
Really, anywhere else other than court, that's a problem.
Yeah.
And then get that person services. Yeah.
Say that again. Anywhere else than a courtroom, there's still a child. Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that's a correct statement.
Yeah. Magistrate Richardson.
Some of mine are duplicate concerns, but I think identifying.
You could use the microphone.
Oh, sorry. I'm used to being loud enough. Distinguishing or identifying the difference between mental health services and high quality mental health services. I think we our community struggles that we have one community-based mental health option, and that's the only thing under contract with DCS. And so if we want to try and access other mental health options within our community, they're not under contract with DCS. So who's going to pay for it? And we've recently had someone come into our community who had been part of the community and came back, who's amazing. She's a psychologist who really specializes in trauma. And so we're trying to identify how we can direct some of our youth that really need those interventions for trauma to her, but she's not, it takes too long to get under DCS contract. And so then oftentimes we're having to just go with our community mental health option, knowing that there isn't that specialty there, but that's what gets paid for. So I think just assessing that situation and identifying how do we get funding or how do we contract with high quality mental health services, not just what currently exists.
So I think, I mean, that's a provider issue. I mean, as we look at the system the state pays for, I mean, that is the community mental health system. We spend hundreds of millions of dollars on that system and the Medicaid system. So when we have an issue like that, I mean, we should be working with the provider. They should be providing services. I mean, that is their sole purpose in this, to meet the needs of the community.
And I think completely agree in theory.
As we transition from CMHC to CCBHC, right, those quality metrics are public, right, and entities who are engaged and involved in that transformation. We not only are sharing publicly how many people they're serving, but the quality of those services. Like we have 21 metrics now that we're measuring them on, right? We're requiring evidence-based models to be implemented, where this CMHC model didn't have those kind of requirements built into it, right? So I do think we're turning a ship. So it's not overnight, right? And it's going to take some time, but I would challenge the fact that there are changes happening within the behavioral health system, but also thinking through because of continuity of care, right? So it's not great to use one provider while you're system involved because you have a payer source. And then when you leave that system, you no longer have that same payer source. So you have to switch, right? Like therapists. So figuring out a way to maybe, like you said, improve quality, right? And access at the same time. So
We have a number of grant programs that request to use providers that aren't Medicaid providers, which creates huge issues around rate setting and their fee structures. But then we get into the DCF issue, and we have a number of programs that come to us, and we constantly have to say, who's paying for this? Is this actually something that DCS has already contracted? And a lot of these are providers that are part of the grants. And the question is, do they have a DCS contract for the work that's being requested as part of the grants? And so some of this is a transformation piece, but also some of this is a who's on first and who should be paying for these services.
I think there is an aspect of it that we recognize that self-reporting at times is very unreliable and questionable. And those criteria that we're talking about, it's those behavioral health facilities that are self-reporting what they're doing. There doesn't seem to be any independent analysis of that. And if there is, I'm not seeing change happen in my community provider. I'm also seeing tons of rollover. The minute that somebody gets a therapist, then 3 months later, that therapist is left. And now they have to get a new therapist. Same with skills coaching. Same with all of these interventions that are supposed to be evidence-based that help. There's not consistency in the provider. And I can appreciate that there's a recognition that there needs to be quality. I'm just not sure that there is a system in place yet that I've seen experientially that results in quality consistently. That's the unicorn. When we have really strong services and we see a significant change in the family, that's the unicorn. And I wish it wasn't the unicorn. I wish that that was the standard and the exception was we don't see the change. One woman's opinion.
Can I just ask one other thing? If there is a service though that is not contracted with DCS though, we do have the ability to be able to pay for that service.
Yeah.
So that, I mean,
yes,
that can't happen. And then I don't know that your situation. I mean, that's talk about it. But I just want to let everyone know. I mean, that is, and if they have experience.
Well, and our solution, the solution has been that that therapist is seeking to get different authorizations for Medicaid billing, right? And so if the parents are under a certain program for Medicaid, I ask the parents, what's your Medicaid? Who's doing it? Is it Anthem? Is it somebody else? Because I know who she's been approved to provide services for. And so we're not even doing a referral for it through our juvenile delinquency or our CHINs. We're just having my court order is you go to this particular counseling agency because I know it's going to get paid by Medicaid. So I'm just saying for a small community to even have options is a struggle for quality services.
But I think you have to recognize that we're ranked 44th nationally for mental health workforce, right? So that's bad, right? We are a 500 to 1 ratio in the state of Indiana, and it's a nationally a 320 to 1 ratio. So we are behind as a state, let alone your community, right?
Absolutely.
Like, yeah, it's a workforce. So people jump because you might get, you know, a little bit higher pay over here, or you get a little bit more opportunity to work remotely, right? Versus in person. I think it's a big problem to tackle right now.
No, I agree with that.
A company car, yes.
But we're supposed to be tackling, right?
Yes, yeah,
And
yeah.
bringing it up.
For the sake of
Uh-huh.
today's conversation.
No, I'm kidding. So
if I can jump in, Magistrate.
Please.
So for the sake of today's conversation, I heard several parts to that, much like Judge Dolahanty's. So I heard quality services improvement. So that's one top subtopic. Another is funding mapping. So we've heard that theme running around the table as well. But I heard it from a different perspective from you today, and that is we've been talking about funding mapping within the system. What I heard you just say is you funding map with every family in your courtroom, which sounds like a great practice for our juvenile judges. So sort of subtopic of that, I think, would be asking and getting the right answers to those questions. So you're looking at the continuity of services for each child rather than ordering the usual things. So I wanted to point out that little sub piece of that.
Thank you. That is a distinction. Thank you. So then the last thing on my list, since I've done two, is that there is an issue with a lot of the qualified residential treatment programs denying children access to the programs. I'm experiencing that. We have a lot of domestic violence cases where they're deemed violent, and it's oftentimes because of the dynamic within the family. And those kids, though, are getting denied right and left. There doesn't seem to be, to me, there does not seem to be any kind of gradation or spectrum of violence when these qualified residential treatment programs will deny kids. They're just denied. And that just seems to be a gap to me when we can readily identify that it's the family structure and we don't have places. Well, I'm struggling to have these kiddos placed. And so DOC ends up being the last resort. And the families have tried different options. So I think identifying what the criteria is for acceptance into these qualified residential treatment programs and what incentives are there to accept the kids that are challenging. I just feel like we've gotten JDAI, we've got all of these diversion things. And so what we're seeing in actual court, these are the high acuity youth. And that's how we're designing it to be. And then for those kiddos, I seem to feel like I have fewer options. And that just seems backward to me. So identifying what that criteria is for acceptance and how do we change the perspective to understand that these kids need treatment, and if they can't get it in the current residential placements, are there other options other than DOC? Because right now there aren't.
I think that theme carries through one of Magistrate Foley's items as well. So knowing what's available and where to. So another sort of map to placement. Okay. Thank you. Any other clarifying questions for Magistrate Richardson? Tracy?
Okay, this is good. I didn't copy from anyone, but I do feel like maybe we're all somewhat on the same page, because I'm just going to echo what a lot of people have said. Guns, guns, guns. We really need to be much more effective. We have so many problems. So it's on a lot of levels, right? I've heard the parents that, do we need to have more education? Do we need campaigns to deter kids from thinking this is cool? But we also, at least from the prosecutor perspective, definitely need to continue to have clear laws that are accountable and that are clear to kids. I think we forget, maybe we're putting kids in danger. If I'm hanging around with a bunch of kids and some of them are 18, 19, guess who they want to give the gun to, who's probably not going to get in as much trouble streetwise, right? Because they still could get waived and lots of things could happen if you kill someone. But yeah, they're going to hand the gun to the 15-year-old or whoever. So, I mean, we just really need to, there's so many things on so many levels I could go into about it, but that's just our number one concern. Number two is serious and violent crime, which is also, I know it's spotty and I don't want to be alarmist and say it's on a huge increase, but you see what you see, and younger kids. And so we also have real concerns about the lack of secure detention around the state. We get that call all the time from prosecutors who are in a panic because their court's not finding any place to put this kid. And now they've got to go tell the family or the victims or whoever that person's going to be, guess what, back in your little community or maybe back at your child's school. And those are not good situations. So however we want to address that through legislation, there's also the determinate sentencing statute for those most violent of violent juveniles, which is unusable for no reason except that we've never gone back legislatively and fixed that. I don't know, judges, it's the 3137-19-9, which is determinate sentencing if you committed murder, armed robbery, rape, and you can't use it because it references 11885, which is putting someone on a sex offender registry. So they're not even sex offender cases. And I know that determinate sentencing is somewhat disfavored, but when our DOC has decided that every child is going to be rehabilitated within a year, we're kicking them out. It's something that we might need in our arsenal sometimes in those particular cases. And I know that JDAI and all the work we do is wonderful, but I also know that we continue to have those most serious of cases that we need to treat and have the tools available for. So those are some of our main concerns. And my third concern is around mental health, which we've all talked about, behavioral health, mental health. And we know it's a lack of providers. I don't know if there's some way this group can leverage ourselves to maybe have a targeted partnership with the universities. We don't really train enough people who specialize with children or specialize in forensics. I don't even think that's a specialty in our psychology departments in our state. So we're just missing a lot of those pieces. And so when we are looking, the other thing I hear all the time is there's not quality in what we have because we're just trying to keep a system of some sort to even refer kids to. So maybe building that out, we can also build in the quality, but those are some other serious concerns we have. Okay. That's one.
Any questions for Tracy? All right, Nancy.
My number one priority is data. We are doing work in the data work group and with counties, but it's a long haul, and we need to remember that. We're not going to get quick return on some of this. And that includes everything from what the work that we're doing with counties to support data quality, but also the systems. We have systems that don't talk to each other. We have systems that don't, and that's even within the same shop that don't talk to each other. So this group, I want us to continue pushing that forward. We need to know better about what's happening with our young people. I've said it before. I cannot tell you, no one can tell you how many young people are in secure detention today in Indiana without calling individual 17 facilities or getting reports from 92 counties. And we should be better than that. I have a lot of, so there's a lot of stuff I've heard today that's very practical and down in the weeds. My stuff is a little bit broader. One of the things though that is a little bit more, I don't know if it's down in the weeds or not, the issue of detention beds, I feel like there could be a way to support from a state level some funding streams or something to support the detention facilities. We do not have a shortage of beds. We have a shortage of staff that is willing or able to work in those facilities to open those units. And the second thing about that is we have funding models for detention facilities that rely on incarceration of young people to stay afloat. We have a county in Indiana that their county funds staff only. They are required to hold kids from other counties and get a per diem to feed those kids, to educate those kids and do any programming. And it blows my mind. That's not what happens in the county jails are not a cash cow. County jails are an expense for counties. Why is not the same for detention facilities? So whether it's, being able to, give every facility a base amount so that we do not have to rely on the backs of kids and incarcerating kids to fund these facilities. I think that there would be facilities that would open other units, would be able to pay their workers a living wage to do a very important job, which is taking care of our kids. The other thing I would say, it's been said, I think that this group should take on some project of a funding map. I think that one of the reasons it's been brought up around the grant funding, the YJC grant funding through CJI, but some other things too. Counties either are worried about the sustainability piece because they don't know. They don't know what federal funds support with youth justice. They don't know what state funds support. They don't know all of those things. So a way to do it as not only education for ourselves and for the whole state, but in a very simplified way to go to a county and say, you want to do this program, here are your options. So some kind of funding map I think would be super important. Alongside that, and this came up with Liz, I added this, funding for Defense Council, and please don't get upset with me, Tracy, but Defense Council is the only guaranteed right that we have for attorneys for young people. Yet there is more funding that is allocated to the prosecution side. And so we don't, and the structure. There are courts that contract with attorneys, and I've heard those attorneys say, and I'm not outing anybody, but they're saying, if I don't, yes, they're vigorously defending their clients, but if they somehow get crossed with a judge, they're not even going to get cases because they contract. It's a contractual relationship between the defense counsel and the court, which is just very strange to me. So some way to equalize so we don't have justice by geography related to defense counsel. Adding on to what Magistrate Richardson is talking about with the residential treatment providers, I really would like to encourage this group to support DCS in addressing contracts that are no eject, no reject. They are, as has been pointed out, the progress that's been made leaves courts dealing with young people who are more violent, more mentally ill, all of those things, which is what they should be dealing with. And we have residential facilities and detention facilities that are saying these young people are too violent for us. Detention, it blows my mind. You're in jail. Like, who do you think you're gonna have in jail? When we get the
And they end up in DCS office.
right. When we get the
the most qualified.
when we get the the background noise out of the way and we have diversion for the young people who are appropriate for that, what are we left with, and how can our systems collaborate to serve those young people better? The other thing that I will say is I would love for this group to somehow take on a project of exploring an option of a third system. Your colleague, Judge Weissman, I always say her name wrong. Thank you, Weissman, has been very interested in that. We have two systems. We have a juvenile system and adult system. There are courts across the country that are exploring options of a third system for young people who are 18 to 25. A completely separate system because of what we know about brain development and everything else. Also what we know about desistance. Crime falls off in general a lot after young people are in their late 20s and into their early 30s. And so being able to have a third system or some kind of a specialty court system that could address that population. And the last thing that I will say is I hope that at some point that this priority setting is also going to be discussed with youth and families. We can all sit around and talk about what our priorities are, but without hearing from young people and families about what their priorities are for youth justice in Indiana, we're missing the boat. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Any questions for Nancy? All right, Nicole.
My first would be gun safety or gun violence and access to guns. I didn't see it until a couple of years ago, and we've just seen an increase. We already have as many gun offenses at this time this year that we did in the entire year last year. And so some way to address that and fix that before more kids end up getting killed or hurt. The second is the THC vapes, the access to those. We're also seeing younger and younger kids caught with those in schools. And it's, they don't understand what that's doing to their brain and brain development. And so somehow addressing that. And then the third is kind of piggybacking off of Magistrate Foley's 10, 11-year-olds, those youth. But, it's a guess, I don't have numbers, but I would guess that 98% of the youth that come through our door at probation have past DCS involvement. And so I would love to see, and past DCS involvement where they were removed, but maybe they didn't get services. All the services were focused on their parents. And those kids come out of that still with the same trauma that they've never had addressed. And so when you say third system, I would like to see a third system that is built and designed for those kids as a follow-up post DCS services to keep them out of the delinquency system later.
So yeah, I like being in the third to last season. Because I would agree with, every lot of the stuff that's being said. One of the things that part of my position with DCS is to be able to as kind of the gatekeeper for DCS and probation for all of our high acute kids who go to out-of-state treatment facilities. I've been doing that for about 5 or 6 years now. And probably in the last couple of years, I continue to see younger and younger kids that I'm staffing to the point of where the detention facilities are saying they're too extreme. And I'm like, what do you want us to do, right? And so, so one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is how do we, and well, let me back up. There's a lot of tension a lot of times that, of course, is created between probation and DCS with these kids. Who do they land on? And then a lot of times what I find is, where's the community mental health department at this? And earlier on, and bringing all of us together with these young kids and to be able to try to figure that out. We've started some things and continue to work on those, but I'd like to see what are we doing on the dual identification piece when we first start, and how are we being able to identify those kids actually, and then coming together and having those types of meaningful conversations and meetings with the community mental health there, with release assigned, and we're sharing all that information, kind of like we just talked about. And I think just a retraining on that and a push for a dual identification and conversations. One of the other things that I see that could kind of help this conversation with kids being able to, and I don't know where this is going with this, Eric, because I haven't talked to you about it, that is the utilization of CMHI and CMHW. Is there an education around that? And because I've in the last year, I've went and sat in a lot of county offices just to be able to work and meet with them. And I talk, about these high acute youth and those things. And a lot of them don't have education on how to access or what it means, CMHI, CMHW is. And I've even talked to some judges and then they're not, they're new to the bench or whatever, so they're not familiar with it as well. So I'm just kind of curious on if that's staying, where that's going, those types of things, and how can we kind of market that and re-strategize that to be able to help families before they even get into our systems. And then the other thing is, I really like what Magistrate Foley had put in there in regards to tailored parental participation orders and the use of participation plan in JD cases. Because what we have seen is that a lot of the juvenile cases, last few years, is an increase of the use of family preservation services. So we're not only, in a lot of counties have really done a great job of not focusing just on that youth, but focusing around the family and treating that family. But they also have the ability to be able to, utilize that family prevention services or other services that treat that whole family. So we can be able to, get the younger children that may get in the adult court and be able to help, because they're all going to be able to return, those kids are returning back to those same parents. So, and then kind of getting those participation orders in there to be able to kind of push that for them to participate. So, and I'm sure there's a lot more, but
Questions for Waylon? Right, Sarah?
Okay, so I agree that with everything, so just trying not to duplicate, but to add a little bit. I think Nancy brought up a good point when she was saying there's no insight into where beds are available. I think that's accurate for our residential treatment facilities across the state also. So I think like systemically, if we had some type of system that helped us organize and coordinate bed availability, I guess that doesn't help with the denials, right? Because they're too acute for acute settings. They're too dangerous for detentions. I think that goes back to workforce. And I wonder if IARCA and that new funding source might be like some synergy around that to help lift up skills to be able to feel comfortable taking more high acuity youth. But bed availability is always a question. And I think we had thought about it on our work group by like, can we educate judicial officers on the different programs that are out there? And I just feel like that's not like the best solution. Yeah. Is it a Band-Aid? Yeah. We can continue to educate and as systems change. But if we had technology that we could leverage to help with that. I also am interested in understanding treatment as it pertains to inside our detention centers. And I don't know that is standardized across all of them. So I think it's probably similar to our adult system. It's going to be different at every jail, right? On the adult side, I think one of the things we've seen great success in the adult population is leveraging peers in jails. And, I don't know what that looks like for juveniles, but I think finding a way to leverage what we're seeing as successes, in the adult world when it comes to mental health and SUD services, like, is there a way to mimic some of that and create that same type of system in Indiana for kids? I think we need to find better ways to support the locals on how to access these grants, right? And it's a big lift for them to do the applications, to monitor the data, to report out all of those things. And I just think there might be a better way to do some of that.
All right. Questions for Sarah? Thank you, Sarah. Chris, anything to add?
I do have a quick question for you. Your thoughts on, everyone's talked about funding
Mhm.
a lot. And one of the things that comes up with folks is the gap that exists for people who have insurance, but can't access a lot of the treatment providers because their insurance only pays for
Yeah.
a master's level person, but adult and child has skills people. Everyone can maybe identify. It's like, oh, this kid would benefit from having a skills person work with them. The family can't do that. And so then the person ends up with DCS involvement when some of these kids maybe that aren't the super high needs kids could stay out of the system and solve their
Yeah.
problems that way. And so I wonder if some type of a requirement to accept DCS pay, requiring some of these providers to accept private pay as well and accept insurance would help keep, not just, we focus a lot on the high risk youth, but maybe some of the lower risk people that end up in DCS and being paid for by DCS wouldn't have to be if these providers would be required, if they take state money, to take private money too. And I just wonder about your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's, I hadn't thought of that before, but I think about it through the lens of like Medicaid, you know, because when PRTF beds, right? So your PRTF beds for juveniles, those are Medicaid beds, and the rate for those beds is a lot lower than what DCS pays. So a lot of times the provider will say no, right? Because of the funding source, because they're going to get paid a better rate if the kid becomes, you know, paid through DCS. And so is there rate settings, right? And like aligning those so there's not so much like competition.
That's what I'm just in hearing everybody talk about the funding issues. I just wonder if we could take some pressure off of that. If people who could, if we could do something on the, maybe on the insurance side so that people could have more access to use their insurance to pay for some of these things so that kids don't end up in DCS or don't end up having to call the police and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I
don't have an answer, but yeah, I
think it goes back to the fun mapping thing. And I say fun, is it fun?
Fun.
Yeah, it's fun.
It will not be fun.
Thank you, Sarah. Chris?
I'll keep mine pretty brief. One thing I wanted to do is expand on what Judge Dolahanty is talking about with the PR stuff. I'm fortunate enough to get to do this now here, but also do the same for JRAC. And so I oftentimes see the parallels in the work that is being done. One thing that JRAC has going forward is the Michelle Goodman, like the requirements of reporting that says you will talk about these things and present those things to your local JRAC so that the individuals locally are receiving the information. If there's a way to sort of create a local YJOC sort of committee, I mean, it exists in the JDAI counties. That venue exists. I also am not going to be a proponent of requiring locals to meet again for another thing, but to maybe leverage the local JRAC as a venue to talk also about YJOC matters. At a local JRAC meeting, I was able to, or a state JRAC meeting, I was able to report on the detention bed availability report, and that was the most conversation that I've seen generated on just a pure update that came. So there is, I think, some interest in it. So really that, expanding on what Judge Dolahanty said, I also get to put together the surveys that go out annually around detention center use, policies and procedures around diversion. But there's no rules in terms of what goes into that. So expanding the questions, I think, so if there are things that this body wants to know, communicate that with me in advance, and I'm happy to include those in the survey. Nancy kind of stole it without, she didn't know, but I was going to talk, I had written down, find a home for the emerging adults. I got to go to Omaha with Judge Kenworthy, Corey George, Joel Winnicky, and Judge Weissman last year. It was pretty amazing. We applied for a grant to do some things. We didn't get accepted for it, but that's the story of my life. But yeah, I think just to continue working on the emerging adults, we are starting to, actually, it's an emerging sort of topic where more chief probation officers are expressing interest in. whether that be a specialty court or the third system to deal with those individuals. I think also just ensuring that everything I'm taking notes from here, I think informs sort of the action-oriented, passionate speech that Nancy talked about a couple of these meetings ago. As this is now where as things were winding down, it doesn't mean that the work of this group is winding down. It means that it's time to move into the action. Dr. Alsma's group, the data, we're finding out some things that are very actionable, and utilizing people like really great, skilled, talented human beings like Nick and the other youth justice strategists. I joke about dispatching them like a group of ninjas around the state. But I hope that counties will take advantage of that. We've had some counties reach out that aren't JDAI, very small rural counties that struggle with this, and have had some success.
Questions for Chris? 2 left. Catherine?
I have nothing new to add, but I will speak on behalf of the judges of Indiana. We have a few in the audience here, but a month and a half ago, the Supreme Court traveled the entire state and met with essentially every judge in Indiana and passed the microphone and asked them to talk about what their biggest concerns or struggles were. And so the things that came up that relate to this are things that have already been mentioned. The need for more detention facilities or access to detention facilities, the lack of placement for kids with mental health or behavioral health needs, and then sort of related and something you mentioned, some additional funding for the Guardian Ad Litem program, which could potentially serve as kind of a something that could keep kids from getting into this juvenile world in the first place. Those are my 3.
Thank you. Questions for Catherine? Kia, would you like to add your 3?
I would. Thank you, guys. Hasn't been much that hasn't been talked about already. Obviously, instituting somehow youth and community voice. As Nancy mentioned, I think we are all looking at this from a high level, and we absolutely need the folks that are closest to the issues that we're trying to solve for. And so figuring out what that looks like and getting community and youth at the table is number 1 for me. Secondly, in the spaces that we're running these youth councils in Vigo County and in Marion County, a lack of education on the system and how parents and kids navigate this. We're piloting something in Marion County of like a probation orientation that is youth led, but we consistently hear that we don't know what these terms mean. We don't know when we can do this and when we can do that. And so raising that up to a state level to have some kind of standardized way to introduce people into this space once they're already there, I think is needed. And I've heard a lot about the housing in conversation. As you guys know, we have an emergency shelter care that's licensed through DCS here in Marion County. I don't even know if more support is the word that is needed to understand what happens in these spaces. I've heard, criteria that's needed, funding that's needed to hire higher level clinicians to work in these spaces. It is so labor intensive to run any kind of residential and, like I said, emergency shelter care. There absolutely needs to be some more support designed around these spaces and funding allocated to these spaces so that we can get a higher level of clinician into these homes to keep these kids out of detention. And along with that, the process that the family members, like sometimes when kids are brought to our emergency shelter care, we are literally working on an aunt to get cleared through DCS, a friend of a friend to get cleared through DCS. That process is sometimes so overwhelming to get family members or friends approved to even be relative caregivers for these young people. And I would like to see some eyes on that, to see if there is a way to streamline it, to see if there's just what we can do to get kids out of facilities. But we see that kids are remaining with us longer just because we can't get somebody approved. And sometimes it's not just a felony. It's not just, they've had a DCS background. It could be financial. It could be a number of different things. But looking at what we can do to help friends, family be able to step in those times of need.
Any questions for Kia?
Question I have, maybe a comment. As far as approving caregivers or relative or kinship placements, my probation officers can do the process in 3 days that it takes DCS to do 3 weeks. I'm not sure what that is, but I think maybe it's the criminal background checks because probation officers can use the III resource and apparently DCS cannot. I don't know if that can change, but the kids are just languishing for weeks to get somebody approved when my probation officer 3 days or less.
So I think that's a great question to follow up on going forward. We won't solve it today because of the time, but I want to thank everyone for your input today. A+ on your homework, A++. Everyone did awesome. So quickly, I'm just going to try to summarize what we've heard today and give some additional homework for next time. So today I feel like we've done a great job of constructing the elephant. And one of my favorite quotes is, how do you eat the elephant? One bite at a time. So at this point, we're going to now break that elephant back down. So between now and the next meeting date, August 13th, my suggestion is going to be first that I work with the youth justice team to summarize all of this and put it into a digestible format for you that will go out with minutes, the minutes from this meeting. And then between this time and next meeting, August 15th, that we also look for a vehicle to gather youth and family input before the next meeting. Perhaps have someone come and report out on that. Mark, I'll probably reach out to you, perhaps Allie, on how to make that happen between now and next time. And then I would ask all of you to take this list of priority setting and focus on the second bullet down. So think through these things once you receive this list in digestible format. What additional committees perhaps we need to form. I think the two that I heard have some urgency today are community safety / gun violence and legislation because of the timing. So those are a couple of the bigger themes that I heard today around the table, but there are probably others. I would also ask each work group to come prepared to call dibs. So if you see something that you just really want to dive into, and this fits within your work group's expertise, come prepared to tell us that at the next meeting. Sure, I have everything in my notes here. Yeah, those are my suggestions. So any other suggestions for action steps between now and August? Tracy?
I just have a quick question.
Yeah.
So we heard a lot of different ideas, great
Yes.
ideas.
Yes.
And obviously we're all coming from our own silos.
Yes.
So we don't always see eye to eye. I know we love the idea of getting legislation and working together. And I think there's a lot we can agree on and work together on, which is great. But how do we decide priorities and how we're moving forward once we get all this out here? Because obviously there's a lot to work on. How do we decide where the YJSC's priorities are? That's my question.
And
From
that
these
will
priorities.
Yes, that will be, I think, first task for any work group that forms. Children's Commission has clear guidelines on legislative agenda. If there's not support from everyone at the table, then the group as a whole does not support the legislation. So I think guidelines are necessary in the realm of legislation in particular. Any other suggested action steps? All right, really tremendous work, everyone. Oh, and in case you picked up on this one, Chris, today is also National Corn on the Cob Day. So for all of you Hoosiers, have some corn on the cob for dinner.
Later. And I think corn, I think bean.
Actually, I actually have a shirt that says Indiana, we're corny. It's the state of Indiana with a big thing on it because that's my love for it. Yeah.
I think we knew this was the corn.
No, that's not
I would sit back there. If we have enough room.